In court, my ex's new wife said, "She's a gold digger, she only married him for money." The lawyer agreed. I stayed quiet. Then my daughter stood up and said, "Mom, should I tell them what we found in Dad's bank statements?" The lawyer sat back down without a word. Before we begin the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to see more stories like this. I stood in the resonant chamber of the Guildhall, my fingers clenching the polished wood of the petitioner's lectern before me. Alistair Thorne's new consort, Lyra Beaumont, gestured dramatically in my direction, her voice echoing through the hushed assembly. "She's a fortune seeker. She only allied with him for his station and coin." The accusation itself was no shock. Lyra had harbored an ill-concealed disdain for me long before Alistair had formally taken her as his partner. But to hear it proclaimed so brazenly, before the presiding magistrate, before the guild advocates, before my own daughter Iris, it seared me. A molten heat surged in my chest, yet I remained outwardly still. I did not waver. I did not weep. I offered no immediate defense. Alistair's representative, Master Hemlock, stoked the flames further. He leaned forward, his tone oozing conviction. "There is a clear pattern of material gain here, Your Honor. Mistress Vance profited considerably from Master Thorne's rising fortunes during their union. We contend her current requisitions for guild support mirror this established inclination." He was polished, self-satisfied, impeccably practiced. The way he pronounced Mistress Vance, as if I were a mere acquaintance, as if I hadn't been the one nurturing Alistair's child, while he journeyed to distant trade emporiums, as if I hadn't been the one whose meticulous mapwork secured our workshop's lease for the first 3 years while he sought his grand enterprise. Still, I held my tongue. I glanced at my daughter Iris, aged 13, seated just behind me. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She appeared diminutive on the carved bench, but her eyes were alight with a fierce fire. Then, without preamble, she rose. "Mother," she said, her voice firm and clear, slicing through the Guildhall's murmurs, "should I tell them what we discovered in Father's private ledgers?" Every head in the chamber swiveled. Even the guild scribe paused his quill. Master Hemlock faltered, his confident sneer dissolving. He slowly sank back to his seat, wordless. I hadn't anticipated her speaking, hadn't wished for it. I had instructed her to remain silent, to allow the elders to navigate the proceedings, but my daughter, it seemed, had her own intentions. She would not suffer anyone to slander her mother while she bore witness. In that instant, the entire atmosphere shifted. Before the Guildhall, before the barbed accusations, before my daughter found her voice, I had been merely struggling to keep the fractured pieces of my existence from scattering after our separation. It was akin to awakening each morning in an unfamiliar dwelling. The walls felt stark. My name no longer graced any significant guild charters or property deeds. I had transitioned from being Ilara Thorne, partner to the rising merchant, to simply Ilara Vance, the woman forsaken. Few comprehend how swiftly one's world unravels when your partner departs, replacing your shared life as if it were merely a set of cartography tools he no longer favored. Alistair and I had been formally partnered for 14 years. We met at the Lumina Academy of Arts. I was an apprentice cartographer, meticulously learning the craft of map-making, while he was an audacious student of mercantile strategy, full of grand pronouncements and visions of vast trade networks. I was utterly captivated. In those early days he possessed little tangible wealth, but he spoke with the assurance of one destined for greatness. I believed in his vision. I toiled late into the night at the Weavers' Guild, mending tapestries to help fund his guild fees and early ventures. When a promising apprenticeship of his fell through, I deferred my own journeyman status. When we learned I was with child, that was the genesis of everything, of Iris. I constructed my entire world around that precious girl, while Alistair navigated the intricate politics of the merchant guilds, ascending their ranks. I maintained our home, prepared meals, drafted his correspondence, and found fulfillment in being the steadfast support he professed to require. I believed this made me his true partner. I believed we were a unified force. But prosperity altered him, or perhaps it merely unveiled the man he had always been. By the time Iris was 10, Alistair had ceased returning to our shared workshop on the designated rest days. He journeyed more frequently, observing seasonal trade festivals in distant city-states, often alone. The chasm between us was not merely emotional, it was calculated. I would later discover he had been channeling funds and lavish gifts to a woman named Seraphina Dubois. I was unaware at the time, but she had been a fixture in his life far longer than Lyra. When I finally confronted him with the evidence of his deceptions, he made no attempt at denial. He merely stated, "You've lived comfortably for years, Ilara. You ought to be appreciative." Appreciative for being betrayed, for raising our daughter largely in his absence, while he cultivated a clandestine existence behind my back. When he departed, he didn't just claim half our shared assets. He secured the grand townhouse, the trade insurance bonds, the swift cog-driven carriage we had used. I had to battle fiercely just to retain a modest guild stipend and primary guardianship of Iris's apprenticeship with me. He contested every arrangement, perpetually asserting I was attempting to drain his coffers. All the while he resided in a newly acquired opulent townhouse in the Merchant's Spire, complete with a state-of-the-art culinary engine and a new partner, Lyra, who adorned herself in the latest, most extravagant fashions. Lyra was younger than I and brimming with pronouncements about my methods of tutelage, my modest means, my very bearing. I never addressed her directly, but she ensured her derisive opinions reached me. She once sent a perfumed, scathing missive declaring, "It is artisans of your ilk who cause men of vision to despair of true partnership." I kept that missive. I'm not certain why. Perhaps it served as a reminder that however venomous her words, I was not merely imagining her malice. Despite everything, my focus remained on Iris. We shared a small workshop dwelling in the Artisans' Quarter, a mere 2 laneways from her calligraphy master. I began taking on small commissions for decorative maps and star charts, eventually securing a modest but steady contract as a cartography instructor for junior guild apprentices. We possessed little in terms of luxury, but we had tranquility. I crafted simple, nourishing meals. She assisted me with inking fresh map outlines on weekends. We would sometimes sketch fantastical lands or simply sit on the woven rug, poring over ancient atlases with a bowl of roasted chestnuts and a pile of practice scrolls between us. It wasn't a life of grandeur, but it was one of integrity. Then, a formal scroll arrived, delivered by a stern-faced guild messenger. Alistair was challenging our guardianship agreement. He desired a joint arrangement for Iris's apprenticeship, which would effectively halve the guild support he provided. A representative argued, I was not providing a sufficiently prosperous environment. He voiced no concerns about my tutelage, only his unwillingness to contribute fairly to her upbringing. I recall sitting on the edge of my cot, the heavy parchment of the scroll in my hand, feeling as though the very air had been punched from my lungs. I wasn't enraged. I was profoundly weary of having to justify my worth to individuals who had no true conception of what I had given up. Iris found me weeping that evening. She said nothing initially, merely sat beside me, her small hand taking mine. Then she whispered, "You don't have to contend with him by yourself, Mother. I know things, I observe." I didn't press her for an explanation. I simply embraced her tightly and said, "You are but a child, Iris. You shouldn't have to bear such burdens." But in her young mind, she was not merely a child. She was my silent witness, and she had been paying keen attention. The guild hall felt frigid, not in temperature. I wore my most presentable woolen cloak, but emotionally. Everyone in that grand chamber had seemingly already aligned themselves. Alistair sat to my right at the opposing petitioner's table, arms crossed, jaw set. Lyra was beside him, resplendent in a sharply tailored velvet jacket and impractical jewel-encrusted slippers entirely unsuited for a formal hearing. The metallic click of her ornate fan against her data slate was audible even above the low hum of hushed exchanges and the rustle of parchments. I sat with my advocate, a keen-witted and empathetic younger woman named Sorrel. She was astute, but we were under immense pressure. Alistair's representatives had filed a petition that, if upheld, would alter everything. If Magistrate Valerius concurred that I failed to provide a sufficiently advantageous environment for Iris, I could lose primary stewardship of her apprenticeship. It wouldn't merely be about the guild support. Iris would be torn between two households, her studies disrupted, her own quiet preferences disregarded. I cast a glance towards her, seated in the observer's gallery. She had insisted on attending, despite my pleas for her to remain at the workshop. She wanted to hear every word she had said. If they were to deliberate upon her future, she deserved to be present. I could not fault her reasoning. The hearing commenced with solemn formality. Magistrate Valerius perused the submitted documents, his expression unreadable. Then Master Hemlock, Alistair's advocate, rose and initiated his opening address. He traversed the chamber with the air of a performer on a grand stage, his voice measured, his arguments artfully persuasive. "Your Honor," he began, "this is not a matter of restricting a mother's influence over her child's development. This is about safeguarding the child's optimal prospects. Mistress Vance is presently engaged in modest commission-based work, residing in rented artisan quarters with no substantial long-term security contracts. Conversely, Master Thorn possesses the means and established position to offer Iris a future of far greater advantage." He never once met my gaze. I was merely a footnote in his meticulously crafted oration. Then came the calculated strike. Lyra Beaumont rose. She was not required to speak, but she petitioned the magistrate for permission, which he granted. She smoothed the sleeves of her jacket, then advanced with the self-assurance of one utterly convinced of the veracity of every falsehood she was about to utter. "She only formed an alliance with Alistair for his prospects and coin," Lyra declared. "He funded her workshop, her early explorations for rare pigments, her comfortable life. And now she seeks to deplete his resources through guild support and stipends. She never truly valued him. She merely exploited his generosity." My heart hammered against my ribs. I maintained a composed facade. I knew that tears would be interpreted as weakness, anger as bitterness. Either reaction would play directly into the narrative they were weaving. Lyra turned slightly to address the magistrate, more directly. "I do not assert she is an incompetent artisan or a neglectful mother. I assert that her motivations are primarily material, and that, Your Honor, is of paramount importance." Then came the most wounding part. Master Hemlock stepped forward again, as if to underscore Lyra's words with the weight of guild law. "Your Honor," he intoned, "we maintain that Mistress Vance's material considerations have consistently guided her actions. She derived significant advantage during their union and has persistently sought to do so following its dissolution. This is not a matter of shared guardianship. It is a matter of ensuring equity and accountability." My chest constricted. I had remained silent through so much, through Alistair's profound betrayal, through the nights Iris had tearfully inquired why her father was perpetually too occupied for her, through the lean months when I had foregone meals so she wouldn't perceive the diminishing stores in our larder. I had preserved my dignity through it all, but sitting there as they portrayed me as some indolent, grasping opportunist, I felt as though I were being systematically effaced. I glanced at Iris once more. Her small fists were clenched in her lap. She was gazing directly ahead, not at her father, not at Lyra, but at Magistrate Valerius. I believed it would conclude there. I presumed they had delivered their damning pronouncements, and we would proceed to the presentation of formal evidence, testimonies, and guild records. But before another word could be uttered, Iris rose to her feet. "Excuse me," she said. The guild hall fell silent. She took a tentative step forward. The magistrate appeared taken aback, yet intrigued. "May I address the hearing?" The magistrate looked towards me. I gave a hesitant nod, my heart thundering in my chest. Iris advanced slowly, her chin held high, her voice remarkably composed. "I have but one query, Mother. Should I inform them of what we discovered in Father's private?" "Ledgers!" Audible gasps rippled through the chamber. Master Hemlock blinked as if he had misheard. Lyra's features hardened. Alistair stirred uneasily in his seat. Iris looked directly at me. She wasn't angry. She was calm, almost weary, weary of feigning ignorance, weary of observing others malign her mother. I offered no verbal response. But I knew with a certainty that resonated deep within me that there was no halting her now. Everything was poised to change. I hadn't instructed her to speak. I hadn't solicited her aid. But Iris had perceived the truth beneath the cloak of silence I had wrapped around myself. That truth had been a heavy weight upon her young shoulders, and in that moment, she made the decision I had been too timorous to make. She stood in that guild hall as if she possessed every right to be heard. Magistrate Valerius paused, observing her with a cautious yet keen interest. A child interrupting a formal guild hearing is not an event one dismisses lightly, particularly when the assembly has just heard accusations of concealed dealings. "I beg your pardon," Iris said clearly, "but they claim my mother took coin from my father. That is not so. My father is the one who has been diverting guild funds and personal assets." Master Hemlock rose partially, as if to voice an objection, but the magistrate raised a hand, signaling him to remain seated. "Iris," the magistrate said, his tone surprisingly gentle, "this is not a formal testimony. However, I will permit you to speak briefly. Proceed." Iris took a deep breath. She glanced at Alistair, then at me. Several months passed. During a visit to Father's townhouse, he was assisting me with my studies in celestial navigation. He accessed his private financial ledger on his desk terminal to authorize payment for a new astrolabe charting program, but he neglected to secure the ledger after he departed the study. I saw the display was still active. I did not intend to pry, but a particular series of entries caught my attention. There were numerous disbursements, significant sums, designated for a Seraphina Dubois. The name struck Alistair like a physical blow. He blinked rapidly, striving for composure, but I could discern the panic flaring in his eyes. Lyra, beside him, visibly stiffened. She too clearly recognized the name. "She received funds or valuable goods almost every month," Iris continued, her voice unwavering. "Sometimes twice within a single cycle of the moon, and these were not trivial amounts. I said nothing at first, but I later confided in Mother about it. She told me it was not our concern that I should not become entangled. I had indeed told her that. I had insisted it was not her burden to carry, that she should not be drawn into the complex deceptions of adults. But she had memorized every detail. Seraphina was not merely an acquaintance," Iris stated with conviction. "She was someone my father met with clandestinely. I recall her from before the separation. I saw her once at the Gilded Compass Tavern. They were seated together, sharing wine and laughter. Father instructed me not to mention it to Mother." The Guildhall was utterly silent. Even Magistrate Valerius appeared momentarily stunned. No one had anticipated the daughter speaking, and certainly not with such clarity. She was composed, not overwrought or disoriented. She was precise, deliberate, and her honesty was heart-rending. Iris reached into her satchel and retrieved a neatly folded oilskin packet. "We made transcriptions of the ledger pages, just in case." I brought them. Sorrel, my advocate, turned to me, her eyes wide with astonishment. She, too, had been unaware of this. I hadn't provided her with the documents because I had no intention of using them. I had no desire to sling mud. I had hoped to prevail with dignity. But my daughter possessed different, perhaps truer instincts. She had witnessed people malign me for years, and now she had reached her limit. Sorrel rose and approached the magistrate's dais, accepting the packet from Iris. She presented it to the magistrate. "Your Honor, I was not previously apprised of this evidence. However, if permitted, I believe it bears direct relevance to the assertions of material motivation." Magistrate Valerius accepted the packet and opened it. He read in silence page after page detailing Alistair's clandestine transactions, significant sums, diverted steadily, all while he publicly proclaimed I was the one draining his resources. Master Hemlock stood once more, this time with a more circumspect air. "Your Honor, we must object to the introduction of materials procured without explicit authorization." The magistrate raised a hand. "She accessed these records while within her father's residence, from a ledger he himself left unsecured. It is not, strictly speaking, a breach of guild protocol, but I shall rule on its formal admissibility later. For the present, I have seen sufficient to comprehend the wider context." Alistair looked incandescent with fury. Lyra stared fixedly ahead, her jaw tight, her mind visibly racing. undoubtedly reassessing every tale Alistair had ever spun for her. That, however, was no longer my primary concern. The equilibrium within the Guildhall had palpably shifted. No one was now branding me a fortune seeker. No one was feigning that Alistair had nothing to conceal. I rose, walked to where Iris stood, and gently drew her into an embrace. "You did not have to do that, my brave girl," I whispered. "I wish to," she replied, her voice muffled against my cloak. "You always safeguard me. I thought perhaps it was my turn to do the same." I pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I did not feel as though I were battling alone. Magistrate Valerius took his time meticulously reviewing the ledger transcriptions. Each rustle of parchment seemed to resonate amplified in the stillness. No one dared to speak. Even Master Hemlock, who had paraded about the chamber with such self-assuredness only moments prior, now sat rigidly in his chair, his earlier confidence utterly deflated. At last, Magistrate Valerius looked up. "Master Thorn," he said, his voice devoid of inflection, "can you elucidate these recurrent substantial disbursements to a Mistress Seraphina Dubois?" Alistair cleared his throat, attempting a disarming smile. "She was an old acquaintance, Your Honor. I was merely assisting her through a period of difficulty." The magistrate arched an eyebrow. "A period of difficulty that extended over 3 years, with transfers and gifts valued at over 60,000 guild crowns." Alistair shifted in his seat. It wasn't entirely consistent. Some of those were repayments for services, for information. To an individual not formally affiliated with your guild, not declared in your asset registries, and certainly not mentioned in your submissions to this hearing. The magistrate's tone was even, yet each word landed with the force of a gavel. "You have pleaded financial constraint under oath, Master Thorn. You have accused Mistress Vance of exorbitant demands, all while covertly diverting tens of thousands of crowns in undisclosed transactions." I did not smile. I did not exult. I watched as Alistair seemed to diminish, the sheer weight of his deceptions pressing down upon him. Lyra remained motionless, her gaze fixed upon the polished floor. "Master." Hemlock attempted a recovery. "Your Honor, even if these transactions fall outside the purview of our initial petition, they do not negate our fundamental assertion regarding—" The magistrate cut him short. "What they do, Master Hemlock, is grievously undermine your client's credibility. You have accused Mistress Vance of financial artifice, yet your client was demonstrably financing a separate, undisclosed liaison. That fundamentally alters the context of this entire proceeding." The chamber was steeped in silence. Advocate Sorrel gave me the faintest of nods. I understood its meaning. The magistrate wasn't merely re-evaluating the guild support. He was reconsidering the entire petition concerning Iris's apprenticeship. Lyra finally shattered the silence. She rose abruptly, whirling to face Alistair. "You told me she was draining your resources," she hissed, her voice low but sharp as a shard of glass. "You claimed you could not afford to maintain 2 prominent households, and yet you were channeling wealth to her all along?" Alistair attempted to placate her. "Lyra, not now." She snatched her arm from his grasp. "No, this is precisely the time. You have publicly humiliated me in this guild hall. You have embroiled your own daughter in this sordid affair. And for what? To conceal the fact that you were deceiving all of us." With that, she swept from the chamber, her ornate slippers clicking angrily on the stone flags. Alistair made no move to follow. Magistrate Valerius leaned forward. This hearing was convened to scrutinize the suitability and financial standing of Mistress Vance concerning the upbringing of her daughter. Based upon the evidence presented, particularly that brought forth by the child Iris, I find the concerns regarding Mistress Vance to be entirely without merit. Indeed, I discern a consistent pattern of integrity and commendable restraint on her part. Conversely, Master Thorn's conspicuous lack of transparency and his persistent efforts to misrepresent his financial circumstances raise grave concerns for this guild. He paused, allowing his words to resonate. "Primary stewardship of Iris's apprenticeship shall remain with Mistress Ilara Vance. The established guild support from Master Thorn shall continue as previously agreed." Furthermore, this guild will recommend a comprehensive audit of Master Thorn's declared assets and trade, records to ascertain if any further. Adjustments or inquiries are warranted. I felt the breath long held captive return to my lungs. It wasn't mere relief, it was something far more profound, validation. I had expended so much energy attempting to disprove their false narrative of me. I no longer needed to. Iris slipped her hand into mine. She uttered no word, but her grip was firm, her chin held high, as if she understood the magnitude of her courageous act. I looked at her and knew she would never forget this day, not because her father had been exposed, but because she had spoken the truth, and that truth had carried undeniable weight. As we stepped out into the antechamber of the Guildhall, people made way for us. The same individuals who had murmured and exchanged knowing glances when Lyra had branded me a fortune seeker now regarded me with an expression nearer to respect, or perhaps a touch of contrition. Advocate Sorrel turned to me before she departed. "You didn't just prevail today, Alara," she said warmly. "You demonstrated to all of Ethelberg your true character." I nodded, but my gaze was fixed on Iris. I had always known who I was. I had merely yearned for my daughter to see it too. And now she clearly did. The formal hearing was concluded, but something far more significant had shifted within me. For the first time in many years, I walked out of the Guildhall not burdened by shame. I was not a woman desperately defending herself against calumny. I was not someone clinging to remnants of dignity. I was, quite simply, myself once more. Ilara Vance, cartographer of Ethelberg, a mother, an artisan, and a survivor who would no longer allow her narrative to be dictated by another's falsehoods. Iris and I walked back to our workshop, dwelling in a comfortable quiet. I unlatched the sturdy oak door, but neither of us immediately moved to enter. She stood gazing down the cobblestone laneway, absently tracing the pattern of a carved door knocker nearby, a habit she had when her thoughts were too vast for easy words. "You did something incredibly courageous today, my dear Iris," I said, softly. "But I must ask, are you all right?" She nodded, then met my eyes. "Yes, Mother, I didn't anticipate it would feel so weighty afterwards." I reached out and gently took her hand. "That is because you stood for something true and just, Iris. Speaking truth, especially in difficult circumstances, can indeed feel heavy. But you did so with remarkable strength. I am immensely proud of you." She glanced back towards the bustling sounds of the artisans' quarter. "I didn't do it for myself, Mother." "I know, my love," I replied. "But in doing so, you revealed to everyone the profound quality of your own character, and that matters more than any falsehood they uttered about me." We returned to our modest workshop, the scent of parchment and drying inks familiar and comforting. The pigments on one wall still needed a fresh coat, and the cog-driven window shutter still creaked when the wind blew from the east, but the space felt warmer somehow, more truly ours, more earned. That evening, after a simple meal of bread and cheese, I settled Iris into her small alcove bed and sat beside her while she meticulously examined an illustrated scroll of constellations she had cherished for years. I smoothed a stray lock of hair from her brow and kissed her cheek. "Mother," she asked, her voice soft in the dim light of the oil lamp. "Yes, my sweet. I know you did not wish for me to speak at the Guildhall. Were you displeased with me?" I considered her question for a moment. "No, Iris, I was fearful. Fearful that it might provoke a worse outcome, that they might contort your words and amplify the injustice. But you were not rash, you were precise, and you were right." A small smile touched her lips. "I did not want them to speak falsely of you any longer. You are not what they claimed." I squeezed her hand gently. "Neither, my dear, are you defined by their judgments." After she drifted to sleep, I sat at my large drafting table for a long while, the glow of the embers in the small hearth casting dancing shadows. I unrolled the sheaf of meticulously kept notes and copied guild records I had once concealed. Documents Alistair never imagined I would compile, records he never conceived I would preserve. I had shielded his reputation for so long, not from any lingering affection, but from ingrained habit, from a misplaced sense of propriety. I had wanted to believe there was still integrity in silence, but silence is only a virtue amongst those who honor it. That Guildhall and the pronouncements within it had taught me a truth I had been reluctant to acknowledge. Remaining silent to preserve a false peace is only effective when you are not the one under siege. I was no longer silent, and neither, it seemed, was my daughter. I had no notion of what would transpire next with Alistair and Lyra. Whether their alliance would endure or fracture under the weight of his deceptions was of no consequence to me. I did not require their downfall to feel complete. Their malice did not define me, and their condemnations no longer carried any authority. What I carried forth from that Guildhall was not a thirst for retribution, it was a profound clarity. They had branded me a fortune seeker because it was a simpler narrative than confronting their own avarice and duplicity. They had attempted to diminish my years of dedication and intricate craftsmanship to mere guild stipends and contractual clauses. But they had overlooked where the true strength resided. With me, the artisan who persevered even when her tools and livelihood were threatened. With me, the mother whose daughter recognized her intrinsic value long before the wider world did. I ceased chasing elusive justice and began to stand firmly within my own truth. At the Cartographers' Guildhall the following week, my fellow artisans inquired about the outcome of the hearing. I smiled and stated simply that the matter was resolved. I did not recount the intense drama, the palpable tension, or the profound silence that had enveloped the chamber following Iris's quiet query. That moment was ours, Iris's and mine. It did not need to be circulated as mere tittle-tattle. It was now an indelible part of our shared history, a narrative we owned, one that no other could now dictate for us. The next morning, as Iris prepared for her calligraphy lessons, she seemed to stand taller, straighter. She adjusted her simple woolen tunic, slung her satchel of scrolls and inks over one shoulder, and offered me a smile that radiated an unshakable self-possession. "Prepared?" I asked. "Always," she replied. And so was I. I was not a fortune seeker. I was a mother, an artisan of Ethelberg, and they would not soon forget the day my daughter reminded them, with quiet courage, precisely who I truly was. May this chronicle serve as a testament for any soul who has ever been undervalued, unjustly silenced, or grievously misjudged. Know that your own truth possesses an inherent power, and sometimes it requires but a single clear voice, perhaps as unexpected and courageous as that of a child like Iris, to awaken the world to its resonance. For in every heart that has felt the sting of unfairness, there lies a story, waiting to be told, a strength waiting to be claimed, and every voice, every truth ultimately matters.